Now we're going to try to interpret this.
What if they were just with people? They built something there.
Nobody knows where the sea peoples came from.
Atlantis.
Well, so Philip comes home early. Aristotle, what are you doing?
Have you read that the Native Americans are actually the Jews?
Oh, you mean Mormonism? The Greeks are digging tunnels beneath Turkish cities.
Original Phrygians, and then other ones moved in, and those were the re-Phrygians.
And then GE stepped in there, of course, and they electrified the whole thing.
Oh, good God.
Someone kept on saying things about groups of people.
Okay, stop it.
He's not even the coolest fake Socrates.
Mm-hmm. It would have been so far chauvinistic that it would be gay.
Do you have a map of where that maximum was on the globe? Notice I said globe.
But this is America's podcast.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to yet another episode of History Unhinged, which is the proper name for the show, not the thing you've been saying while you do the clappy thing.
I'll break my chains every day.
Okay, that's not the one I was talking about. But we definitely didn't shoot an entire 15 to 20 minutes of stuff that ended up having to go on the Patreon
Because
segment.
someone kept on saying things about groups of people.
Stop it. It'll all make sense in the Patreon segment.
Well, half of it will, considering the end of this, the last 15 minutes of this, will also end up on the Patreon.
Yes, exactly.
Point,
We'll get there.
Yeah.
We'll get there. So it would have been an algorithmic issue, not a I said bad things issue.
So, keep in mind, it involved flat earthers. We will say this. It involved flat earthers.
We were explaining people who believe wrongly that the earth is flat and why they believe this.
Yes, which we still have to finish as a conversation later
well,
on.
I've never been great at finishing.
It's just the admin.
Yes. No, that was the Zoloft, actually. Oh, boy. Anyway.
And canceled again.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
So, you know what? We should just jump right into it. How do y'all feel about Atlantis?
I love that movie.
Okay. I don't know what I expected.
Agreed about the movie. I hate Plato.
All right. Tell us why.
The Romans stepped in immediately. Those damn Greeks and their silly philosophers.
They think they're cool because they can read and have philosophy. Yeah, he's not even the coolest fake Socrates. That goes
Who would you consider to be the coolest fake
number
Socrates?
two of two fake Socrates, man. Xenophon.
Okay.
I mean, Plato means wide. He was a wrestler. He was very strong, so that's cool. Apparently, he once flexed on somebody to win an argument.
I've seen the memes of like Plato. That doesn't help your argument. Not with these games. You know what I mean?
So that's all very well and good, but Xenophon was part of the 10,000.
He was a soldier. He did fight.
Can't beat that.
Was Diogenes the one who said, "Get out of my son"?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was also the one who held up a plucked chicken and said, "Behold, a man."
Yes.
Yep.
Also, that's not what I meant.
The moment you said that,
I said, "Get out of my son," and he was like, "What?"
Well, it was Athens.
you just said like we're talking about the Athenians.
was Athens.
At this point in time, you could honestly mean it either way.
Don't get
anyone
outside
who's
of me or my
confused.
son ever again.
If anything, oh no, I'm not saying that.
Philip comes home early. Aristotle, what are you doing?
Just now, for the way this is going within the first 5 minutes, we're just repeating the same shit.
Okay, but we haven't said anything that is going to get us flagged by the...
Are you sure?
I don't think so. Because we've been vague enough. We've been vague enough.
So about pedestry.
Okay, no.
My favorite...
Stop. Take 5.
My favorite,
Go do a lap. Go do a lap around the house.
My favorite Diogenes one personally is that he was caught playing with himself in public.
Yes.
And he
Shake
said-
it once, that's fine.
Shake it twice, that's okay.
He shook it 3 times.
Exactly. And he said, I only wish it was as easy to get rid of hunger by rubbing my stomach.
I feel like, so here's the thing. We talk about Diogenes in the modern day and we're like, yes, the, rather eccentric philosopher Diogenes. But today, if you were walking down the streets of Philadelphia and that was happening, you would not be like, yes, what an interesting philosopher.
Well, cynic, they call him Diogenes the cynic, and that means Diogenes the dog.
Why did people listen to him?
They didn't.
No, clearly they did.
Okay, so Diogenes, if you wanted to equate this to anything, think of it as being the popular homeless guy on the street. Essentially what happened is, like, you know, when you go to an area and there is a person that you begin to kind of recognize as a person, maybe they're not always completely there in the head, but they're an interesting character, doesn't really harm anyone or anything, but you notice them, maybe they shouted a couple things or they say some interesting stuff, enough that you remember that they were there. He was basically that to a more famous level, specifically for philosophy. He was the philosopher homeless guy that would shout things that people took notice of and then remembered.
I knew we'd make it to History Unhoused. I knew we'd get here.
And also,
I'm proud of us.
To add on to that, he fucked with Plato a lot, and everybody hated Plato because Plato sucked.
I'm getting the sense that you really don't like Plato.
I think people were just jealous of his guns.
True. Yeah.
Yeah, it's... Whew. Socrates,
Honestly,
though.
Platonic idealism is dumb, but yeah, what were we talking about? Atlantis.
Yes.
And now we're just talking about Diogenes shitting all over Plato and then touching himself in public.
Well, so Atlantis comes from, like, the general narrative people understand about Atlantis comes from Timaeus, the dialogue between Timaeus and Critias.
Okay, right. That Plato wrote, so.
Yes, that Plato wrote. And people typically view it as people typically view it as being an allegorical story entirely made up. You know, Athens wasn't around 9,000 years before Plato, but he says that it's, you know, a story that was told to him by his ancestor Solon, and that Solon got it from the Egyptians. And, you know, if you're familiar with men like Graham Hancock, you're probably, you know, expecting me to say a bunch of things right now. Obviously, the Younger Dryas is an interesting period. Meltwater Pulse 1b is an interesting period. Do you guys know what those are?
This was the point in which, like, the Earth was more lush, right? Is that what we're talking about?
I'm gonna need you to go on your roll because you haven't covered this in a while.
Okay.
So I want you to go through the full roll, especially for those watching who don't know what it is.
All right. So the basics of this: about 12,800 years ago, the Earth gets colder. The glaciers expand to the largest extent they have been since that point.
On over what course of time?
So the expansion of the glaciers, I don't know exactly, but that begins around 1,208 years ago that this glacial maximum begins. And then 1,200 years after that, 11,600 years ago, so 9,600 BC or so, suddenly it gets warmer. And if you listen to, like, Graham Hancock and some of his shows on Rogan and all that, you're going to hear, like 400 meters of sea level rise described practically as being overnight. It wasn't quite that. It's about 25 meters in 100 years, which is
a lot, but that's not something that would suddenly wipe anything.
Exactly. It wouldn't wipe anything out over the course of a night. But it would, if we're talking about coastal societies, it would actually bury them over the course of 100 years.
Especially with, like, storms taken into account, because that's like averaging roughly a foot a year, isn't it?
Yeah. So, it's about a foot a year.
Yeah.
So that's the thing is, you know, within 10 years, the vast majority of anything you built on the coastline is now underwater.
Yes.
And then another 10 years after that, more of it's underwater. 10 years. And so you're progressively, basically, you have to move back so far from the coastline that it's not useful to you anymore. So it's not like if civilization collapsed today, we'd be like, oh, okay, well, you know, the water rose 20 feet, that sucks, but let's just rebuild everything, you know, a couple miles back. We're good. This is such a long time ago that is a much bigger setback technologically. If you lose buildings, if you lose food, livestock, things like that, you're a bit more screwed.
Oh, yeah.
So that would be, you know, if people had gotten to the point of civilization at this time, they would have been wiped out. Or at least they would have been pushed back a good ways, both technologically and geographically. So this period is called Meltwater Pulse 1b. And you do see over the course of, like, I think, like, 1,000 years, you see, like, 100 meters of sea level rise. But it's not all at once. But there's 25 meters in the first 100 years. Plato says that Atlantis was this, you know, vibrant seafaring civilization that was out beyond the Pillars of Heracles, and that it sank beneath the waves due to its hubris 9,000 years before the time of Solon of Athens, which is 9,600 BC. So it's a very circumstantial argument, but the idea is, how the hell did Plato get the timing that right if he totally made this up? Did this actually get passed down in some form or another from people who had passed the story down orally? And it probably would have been then the Egyptians. So that's the argument for Atlantis not being an allegory is, well, it would be possible that you had a minor civilization on a coast that had reached maybe the Copper Age, and that when the sea level rose, when the climate changed, their civilization was wiped out. It did flood, and then they retreated and they had to restart. And then that's why you see basically the world just starts to get up and running around 4000 BC.
If you were going to give an educated guess on what civilization it may have been,
there isn't one.
No, my point being is like, of those roughly in that area, who would you guess as to being the grandchild civilization of the potential Atlantis?
I think it's so far back that there's no way to even compare.
If there was anything.
I mean,
haven't they gone and done? I remember people talking about going and doing scans to like look for land masses that would be somewhere beyond there that would actually theoretically at that time having been above sea level.
Yeah, well, so that's the thing is there are certain sections of just mainland Europe that would have been.
But so here I'll argue against Atlantis, because if you read anything from the ancient Greeks, his peers, Xenophon or anybody else, they didn't know shit that happened 50 years ago.
Yeah.
They didn't know shit that happened like 100 miles away 50 years ago. So for them to have a memory of 9,000 years would be wild, right?
It would be.
So he's putting it into this made-up characters thing.
Yeah, I think my take on it is basically like, this is interesting. I think I see Atlantis as a possibility rather than a, it must or must not be kind of thing.
I wouldn't see it as necessarily an advanced civilization.
That's the other thing.
Because you got to remember, working within the Greek mindset, and this is a thing that a lot of people don't really get when they think about space. So you have the age of like the gods. You got the Golden Age, you got the Silver Age, you got like the Iron Age. Like you got the different ages that we'd be talking about. And so for them, the past was more glorious than the present. That it was always the case. So that means that even if 3,000 years previously there was nothing in the area, to the Greek mind, 3,000 years ago, the gods walked among man, and it was the age of gods and heroes where the gods were on like Earth. They weren't just up on Mount Olympus.
I also feel like if there was an advanced, if you take the Graham Hancock approach and say there was an advanced civilization before.
What he means by advanced civilization is very different from what I mean by advanced civilization, by
What's
the way.
the difference?
What, Hancock is aliens coming down and actually changing everything?
Yeah, Hancock's is a bit more Ancient Aliens. It's not quite as bad as Ancient Aliens, but it's a bit more in that direction.
He's gotten better about that.
He's gotten better over the years. Yeah. When I say advanced civilization, I'm honestly not even thinking advanced civilization. I'm thinking civilization. Like Copper Age at most.
They may have discovered the early form of metallurgy and actually being able to do something in the same way that the Egyptians were able to. Because
I think if you're beyond that at all, then society recovers from what happened. Because we have the Bronze Age collapse. So we know that society can recover from complete collapse rather quickly, like within a couple hundred years.
I honestly just don't think that technology really... There are very few technologies that have ever been forgotten, right? Even in like the collapse of the Roman Empire, Bronze Age collapse, the technology is very sticky.
It
and
is.
Also, they left all the cool shit, like a lot of the...
Unless it's all underwater.
Yeah, but even the stuff like you have to get from mountain ranges, right? They left all the cool, what do you need to make bronze? What's the
copper and tin.
They left all the tin in the mountains. They left all the...
Well, they didn't leave the tin. One of the going theories, this was the personal theory that I had behind the Bronze Age collapse, is that specifically it was because of the disruption of trade routes.
Yeah.
But here's the thing that people won't realize. You think it's a tin can, It's like this super cheap material. It's so common. No, it's not. Tin is actually one of the rarest materials, especially in Europe and around the Mediterranean. There are, if I recall correctly, 2 primary sources of tin that the ancient Bronze Age civilizations had. One was in the Levant, and one was in Turkey, if I recall.
That's what I'm saying. So if you think there was something before the Bronze Age, then there should be signs of mining of those 2 areas before the Bronze Age.
But that's the thing, is what we'd be talking about here would be entirely underwater at this point.
But there wouldn't be, there's very unlikely to be any sources underwater, right? So they probably had to go to the mountains to get the tin. So there should be signs
theoretically, but there, for example, we have almost no evidence of Native Americans prior to a few hundred years ago.
But they weren't making bronze.
They weren't making bronze yet. Some of them were using copper. Hammered copper.
If you're talking Copper Age, that's different.
That's what I am talking about,
I
is
think that's
Copper
more
Age.
reasonable. I'm just saying if you want to go even to the Bronze Age, it's
But that's what I'm saying is with
yeah.
Bronze Age societies, we can watch them in real time historically recover from collapse.
Yeah.
We don't get that with Copper Age societies. We don't really have any examples of a Copper Age society that collapsed and rebuilt itself. I think if you get past the Copper Age, then the likelihood is that there's a rebound.
But I think that's like just because you can't. It's harder to find examples of societies that were in the Copper Age that collapsed.
Yeah, I agree.
So it's like
Because if they did, they never rebounded.
But it's hard to say like that it's evidence that societies in the Copper Age couldn't collapse and then rebuild simply because they never collapsed, or we don't have any. We don't know.
But that's what I'm saying is if the example we have is a whole bunch of Copper Age societies that never collapsed, that implies that either no Copper Age societies ever collapsed, or that the Copper Age societies that collapsed never made it back.
Or that some collapsed and some didn't.
But that's the thing. If some collapsed,
yeah,
the lack of evidence of them would mean they never made it back.
I'm just saying it's not evidence in any way. Like either way, it's not evidence for either side.
Yes, I agree with that.
Right.
But that's my point, is that there's no evidence against it.
That's fair, but there's no evidence against many things.
True. But in this case, we do have a lot of evidence that people were doing a lot of stuff 11,600 years ago. We have the documentary sources of people saying, oh, I heard through the grapevine of my ancestors that at this point in history, this was happening. And it's like, okay, well, that's just you writing about it. But then we have things like Gobekli Tepe, which they're now moving away from this was a ceremonial site towards this was a village.
Not only that, but that they moved back the age at which it was occupied by, what was the amount? I remember it was a big amount, not just like a couple hundred years. They moved it back by, I think, a good 1,000 to 2,000, didn't they?
I believe that the last date I remember for it is around 11,600 years, 11,500 years.
Because I think it was like 8,000 was the initial estimate.
That was the initial
And then,
estimate.
Yeah, it moved back further to like 10,000 or so.
Yeah, so this is an area that, why it's interesting to me personally,
God, I want to go there.
is if you look at basically the entirety of what we have in world history, you get agriculture, large-scale agriculture, before you get monumental construction. That's basically...
Well, that's what they thought, I guess, right? But
that's the problem, is for the entirety of history and anthropology as developed fields, the understanding has been this is a rigid thing. You never get monumental structures before you have agriculture. And the problem I'm seeing with archaeology right now is that they're going, well, they must have had monumental architecture before agriculture because it's inconvenient to the current paradigm to look at pre-agriculture agriculture.
When is the current paradigm of agriculture?
Starts around 10,000 years ago.
10,000, okay.
So this would wheel that back 1,500 years.
I believe, I don't know too much about this, but people have done, I think, genetic studies about like estimate when wheat was domesticated. You can do that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
I think you would see it in the DNA if it was domesticated like 50,000 years ago or something.
Well, that's the thing, is we're not looking at 50,000 years. We're looking at a difference of 1,500 years.
Which is way harder to distinguish.
Yeah.
Yeah. That takes it out of because the difference between 50,000-year-old wheat and 11,500-year-old wheat is much bigger than the difference between 11,500-year-old wheat and 10,000-year-old wheat.
So if we're just saying that farming started 1,000 years earlier, I mean, the nature of archaeology is that the earliest date that X happened will always get pushed back because it's a one-way process, right?
Yeah.
But so I'd be fine with that. But I guess what do we think? What are we saying these civilizations could do, right?
I would argue that since we know, I think we'd want to look at Gobekli Tepe as the starting point for, all right, if they're, and for me, I'm not by any means sitting here going, oh, it was real. My point on this is I want some more investigation. I want us to look into this, not because I think that there's some cataclysm that's going to happen again and we need to prepare for it. Like that's the Graham Hancock approach, is like, this is a cycle. This thing happens over and over again. And the ancients were telling us about it. For me, I'm just curious. Like, I just think it would be a cool thing. And also I find just this concept to be the final frontier.
Yeah, not some wider conspiracy that is being hidden from people, but that specifically that there is something that might be there to be discovered.
Yeah, and that's, and I'm sure, for you guys, that's probably what you would find interesting about it too, is like most of history, it feels like at this point, is known. We figured out most things. There are certain periods where there's less. But this is the last like real big breakthrough. Like, you know, if somebody finds out, oh, look, you know, I guess the Persians, you know, were practicing Zoroastrianism 200 years earlier than we thought. Cool, I guess.
It's like okay, yeah, there's an interesting religious development, but ultimately those Zoroastrian would be very influential later. It doesn't necessarily mean that that is as important for the area then.
But civilization grew to a certain point and then completely collapsed and then rebuilt. That's a big discovery. And I just think it's cool. I just want to get to the bottom of it because I see these stories and the way the dating lines up and the fact that we have Gobekli Tepe now and the fact they're finding more of them.
I feel like too, though, like a lot of things we call collapse are like humans invading and killing and conquering other humans, right? So it's like, has there been a real natural disaster collapse? I don't think that's honestly...
That's what depends, because even when they talk about the Bronze Age, that's what varies. Because when it comes to the Bronze Age collapse, people have theories. It was disease. No, it was famine.
Volcano.
No, it was natural disaster from volcanoes. That it was the sea peoples. That's like my personal theories I talked about specifically going with the collapse of trade, which in turn would be compounded with everything else. It could be one of these
Could have been a result of the sea peoples.
Yeah, it could have been anything.
Yeah.
What?
Just the sea peoples.
Oh, yeah, the sea peoples go hard. Nobody knows where the sea peoples came from.
Atlantis.
Well, so that's the thing, though. That probably influenced Plato's Atlantis narrative. Like, it makes no sense to say that Athens defeated the Atlanteans. But it doesn't not make sense to say that the Mycenaeans defeated a sea people's fleet.
So, hot take. Speaking of sea peoples, what if they're not people from the sea, but people by sea? And the reality is actually, considering a lot of these timetables keep getting pushed back, what if it turns out that the Native Americans were the originals?
Good God.
And that's where it all started.
Oh,
Nah,
no.
man.
Please don't do this to me.
This can segue into... Haven't you read that the Native Americans are actually the Jews?
Oh, you mean Mormonism?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my God, I still remember one of the big controversies, I think big controversy, one of the things that I had from the very beginning was I pointed out the like historical beliefs within the Mormon church in relation to North America and how everything works. And I remember making this video explaining it and just getting a bunch of really angry comments from very different Mormons who were saying, no, that's a lie. That is not what we believe. And then you had older Mormons coming into the comments saying, yeah, holy crap, yeah, this is wild. That's what it used to be.
Yeah.
Because starting after, I think it was either the late 1970s or the 1980s, they just completely cut out so much of the old history for how they taught the world.
Yeah.
And it's, oh my God, it's wild.
Yeah, I try to be nice to Mormons for the most part about it. I disagree with a lot of their beliefs, but they seem generally to be nice people.
I know several of them. They are all some of the nicest people I've ever met, but it is an interesting
They just got some
religion.
wacky beliefs.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm glad you brought up America because one of the actual known lost civilizations that I think is really cool is the Mississippians.
Oh, the mound builders?
Yes.
Everything?
Yeah.
And that's the thing. Everybody's like, oh, the mound builders. That's not the interesting part. The mounds are cool. They were probably raised building platforms that were just, meant to give you more elevation, higher status, but also, preventing flooding if you're living along the Mississippi floodplains. So, all of that, really cool, right? Well, the part that doesn't get talked about is that they had large trade networks that reached as far west as the Rockies.
Yeah.
That they had cities that were larger than European cities in the Americas up until the late 1700s.
I think what was the estimate that they were talking about upwards of, was it 200,000 people?
In one city, I don't think so. But in terms of across a large area, yeah. But no, you were seeing cities of I think Cahokia was, I want to say 70,000, but it might have been lower, like 45. But the point is, these cities reached a point where they were larger than, it took Philadelphia until I think 1780 to reach the size that some of these Mississippian cities were.
And this was what year period?
The 1400s. So there's this entire culture that isn't what we think of when we're taught about Native Americans, because it's always, we got here and, they were living in teepees and wigwams and all that, just kind of doing kumbaya, and then we killed them all. That's what you learn. In reality, that's not what the Mississippians were. They were not like, your little tribal chief controlled like 6 families that had 12 members each. You had chiefdoms that were hundreds and hundreds of square miles.
Yep.
You had like organized government, organized religion, organized diplomacy. This was what the Europeans would have recognized as a kingdom. And what Hernan de Soto's expedition, as they were making their way up the Mississippi in the 1540s, recognized. They were like, there used to be a lot more people here for sure, but these look like they were legitimate kingdoms. Like these were the kind of things that rival what we have. To them, it wasn't that different from what they had seen with the Aztecs. So so for me, my big question here is like, what happened in the 1400s that caused that collapse? That by the time Hernan de Soto was getting there, there was a shadow of what this civilization was.
I've never really properly looked into it, but I remember one of the big things that people talk about they don't realize for just the sheer impact of disease is that. So here's the thing.
But if it was the disease, where'd it come from?
The South?
But that's the thing. Like the current archaeological belief about the Mississippian culture is that it was in aggressive decline by 1450. So it wasn't European disease.
Which means, because they wouldn't have been able to
That's what I'm
arrive
saying.
by
The
that
South may have been a Central or South American disease from the Aztecs or.
But that's the thing is that would be like saying, oh well, maybe all of these Danish people are dying because of a Croatian disease. That doesn't really happen.
Well, I mean,
historically,
true, but is there, considering the amount of trade you're talking about, is it possible
you would have seen a lot more? That's the thing, is the reason that so many Native Americans died when the Europeans got here is that they had zero immunity to European disease.
Yeah.
North American diseases, even from Mexico, they would already have natural immunity to.
Particularly with the large trade networks that would have gave
that actually would have made them more robust.
Yeah, because they would have already had interactions that would have brought it. Yes, it still could have killed off people, but it would have been more resilient than it otherwise would.
And you would have seen it affecting more than just this one group.
So what about war with one of the Central American communities?
Too far away.
Colonies too far away?
Yeah.
What about the
We don't have any records of the Aztecs. And it would have had to have been the Aztecs.
We do have specifically records that talk about the Aztecs, that they came from the north.
Yes.
That the Aztecs did migrate south. They weren't actually native to Mexico, or at least from that part, is that they were a northern tribe that migrated further south before they settled with Tenochtitlan.
Probably related to the Ute. Or the Paiutes.
Yeah.
Because they speak a Uto-Aztecan language.
So it's really, based on the current evidence, the most likely is disease.
Well,
we don't know.
No, that's the problem. That's the confusing part. Is it's like it doesn't seem likely that it was a disease.
So it
doesn't seem likely that it was war.
That have like records when it comes to the Mayans, the Aztecs, and others. There's more of these stone. You don't really have any of that for the mound builders. So it's not just like guesswork of like, oh hey, here's this thing that we have, and we're going to try and interpret this. It's we don't have anything. Mm-hmm. We just have a shell. What if now we're going to try to interpret this?
What if they were just with people, they built up their mounds?
That would be really funny. So one of the leading theories on it is actually climate change. Because at the same time that the Black Plague was rampaging across Europe, part of the reason it was so severe was the Little Ice Age. Yeah. It suddenly got a lot colder in the 1300s. So one possibility is that also happened in the Americas, and that for some reason, because again, it's hard to say exactly what the process would have been, somehow this climate change event could have caused the collapse of the Mississippians. But another interesting thing, and part of the reason I don't think disease or war make a ton of sense, or at least not war from the outside, civil war might be a different conversation, is that what we see is not a great die-off. There's not, if there was a lot of disease, a lot of war, you would expect to find lots of mass graves.
That was going to be my next question.
Yeah,
is like, well,
we don't
there
have
should
that.
be that. Yeah.
But what we do have is around 1450 to 1500, the Iroquois pop up in New York, and the Cherokee pop up in Tennessee, and the Creek pop up in Mississippi, and the Sioux pop up in the Dakotas. So suddenly, where they're and they all have migration stories. They all talk about migrating from the big river and heading east or north or south. Now, for a long time, the belief with the Iroquois, for example, the Haudenosaunee, was that they had started up in Canada, and the big river in question was the St. Lawrence, the big river that's between the United States and most of Canada. Mm-hmm. if you actually dig deeper into the story, and then you look at the linguistics, which suggests that Iroquoian is far less close, is actually not at all related to Algonquian, which is the East Coast languages, the Northeast languages of the Native Americans. And what you find is that the Iroquoian languages are much more related to Siouan. Now,
Interesting.
Siouan's the Lakota, the Dakota. They're off in the Midwest, in the plains. So why would there be this weird little pocket of like potentially Siouan language surrounded by Algonquian?
Unless they had migrated into the area from the west.
Exactly. And they talk about following a river. Well, if you are trying to get from the Mississippi River up near Kansas and Nebraska, and you need to get to New York, is there a river that goes there?
You head north, you go across the Ohio, and from the Ohio River, it takes you right all the way
To
over.
the Monongahela. Yep. And the Allegheny. So you can end up in central Pennsylvania where the Susquehanna River is, which is named for the Susquehannock, who were an Iroquoian-speaking people, who it was kind of assumed were later arrivals. But the Susquehannock might have been the first ones to get there. And then you might have seen the rest of them diffuse up north. And then the Cherokee, it's weird, it's this Iroquoian group. The Cherokee may not have split off from the north and come south. The Cherokee might have just gone east from the beginning.
Just followed different paths.
Yeah, I couldn't say what caused the Mississippian culture collapse. It's actually what I want to do my dissertation on when I go back to school. But whatever caused it, I think that what we saw when we got here in the 1500s wasn't, the Native Americans at their most advanced. I think we got here during a dark age.
Just a decline from when the varying different tribes or peoples that could have been in an area broke up, split apart, and then spread out across the country.
I think what the Native Americans were experiencing was similar to what Europeans were experiencing in the 500s.
Theoretically, one of the things that could happen, especially if you're in a floodplain, is that in the event of a little ice age, it theoretically could have affected the flood patterns, which would have meant that you would not have had nearly as much rich soil that would have been deposited because things weren't flooding to the same degree, which in turn would have caused a food shortage.
Oh, it was almost certainly a combination of factors.
Yeah, that was going to be my guess, is that essentially it got to the point where once things started warming up a bit more after the Little Ice Age, right as a result of what you just said, then there probably was some form of societal collapse due to the chaos of a lack of food. So that caused groups to then say, all right, well, that's it. We've had it. We're on our own. And now we are going to explore these new, more fertile lands that are now opening up to us. And they all just split off in their different directions.
And that's not even considering the fact that there's like 5 or 6 different language isolates in like the Gulf area of Texas that aren't connected to each other, by the way. Like Natchez, that's a language isolate that's down there in New Orleans.
I've not looked at nearly as much native history as I should.
Well, so that's the thing, is you don't realize how much of it there is. Because in school they're like, and the Pilgrims and the natives had Thanksgiving, and then the Pilgrims killed the natives. And that was it. And we're sorry. And sometimes they don't even actually do the Pilgrims killed the natives part. In reality, it was a lot more complicated than that, and there were a whole bunch of other things going on.
Yes.
Yeah, that is one of the great things about our channel that I've enjoyed, is the level of detail that you go into with the Native American history segments. Yeah, because it's
people are like, what does this Native American tribe have to do with the missing person? And I'm like, absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
I just thought it was cool.
Yeah, he's kind of made it his own personal vendetta to be like, you were not taught proper history about the Native Americans, so I'm going to do it.
I'm gonna learn you a thing or two, boy.
There you go.
That is every single time I do anything with geopolitics.
Yeah.
Yes, this thing happened. Yes, this is because of a thing that happened during the Cold War. But how about we go back to the 1400s during the colonial period of addressing this, and then we can see what led to this.
Yep, literally what I do.
You two are never beating the allegations.
Never beating the allegations. Do you consider yourself Southern or Midwestern?
Well, I'm from Kentucky, which means I'm a bastard cousin of both.
Okay.
That's a great answer.
No, it really is. Depending upon what part of Kentucky you are, it is the definition of a border state with anything.
Yeah.
Because Kentucky is always like, so it is, it's been like called a northern state masquerading as southern. And it's just been called like the southern's bastard northern cousin.
Yeah.
Because depending upon where you are, it will identify with more than one of the area. Like you go out to the east and you're talking more Appalachian. If you go down south, you're definitely getting more like southern. For once you go to southern Kentucky. If you are in the center, where I am, that's our, like, from there to Louisville is considered more like the posh area, like the central area. And then if you go to northern Kentucky, I mean, you're basically just the suburb of Ohio at that point.
Yeah.
Like Northern Kentucky is just the more open, cheaper land that is the suburb of Ohio because every single financial deal was tied to the Cincinnati region and the Ohio River.
Speaking of Southern in particular, we encountered our first Alabaman back when we were in the Smokies. And boy, oh boy, is that accent very thick.
Oh, yeah.
It was
That was always more
impressive.
Savannah.
Yeah. It was a 65-year-old man from Montgomery, Alabama. Mm-hmm. And every Alabaman accent you've ever heard in a movie is not hyperbolic.
He was Bama.
He was Bama.
Also, it was very funny because he and his buddy, like, we were sitting down taking a break because we had just hiked 5 miles down the mountain. His buddy and him walked over and they were just kind of chatting with us, sizing us up a little bit, I think. And they were like, "Oh, you boys have a nice day." They asked where we were from and all. We get up, start walking the remaining half mile to the parking lot, and as we pass him, he looks at me and he suddenly starts asking me questions about Pennsylvania and like the election and politics and everything, with just seemingly like assuming that I was conservative. And what I think it was is when we were sitting down, he couldn't see much, but when we stood up, he could see the .45 caliber handgun strapped to my belt. And he went, "Oh, this guy's cool."
Not all Northerners, apparently.
He was like, "Oh, these Pennsylvania boys better be careful." And then I think it might have occurred to him that Pennsylvania is the South outside of the cities.
Yeah, most people who don't go to the Northeast states, specifically outside of the cities of the Northeast states, don't realize that the Mason-Dixon line is not the separation of the North and South. Shockingly enough.
It is, it's called Pennsyltucky for a reason.
Yeah. There are Confederate flags in, like, upstate New Jersey.
Yeah. Which we don't approve of, by the way.
No. It's just a really interesting phenomenon when you go through, like, Newark.
And it's
Things
confusing.
to specify here on YouTube. Yes, thank you.
It's confusing, like, why are you flying that? You live where the winning side was. Why are you flying? It is like if somebody this year was, walking around flying a Yankees pendant going like, "Hell yeah, we win." Like,
In, like, Louisiana.
yeah. Well, I was more going because the Yankees lost the World Series.
I was
just wanted to rub
combining the
salt
two.
in
No, I know, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we may have been knocked out by the Mets, and I don't want to talk about that, but at least the Yankees didn't win.
Being Philadelphia locals, we go for the little wins.
Yeah.
Because,
like other people losing.
Yeah, because, they manage to break our hearts every year.
Yeah, for example, when the Eagles are doing poorly, we stop rooting for the Eagles to win, and we just start rooting for the Cowboys to lose.
Well, we're always doing that.
Yeah, but more actively.
Yeah, that's true.
So, talk about a lost civilization, the Cowboys dynasty. Where'd that go?
Oh my God! Now we're getting into sports history for shit. But no, that is actually a true statement. Like the Cowboys went from like America's team to America's laughingstock, basically.
You know why they're called America's team, right?
No, there was a whole
marketing ploy in the
documentary.
80s.
Yeah, there's a whole massive documentary on just the marketing strategy to make them into that.
Yeah. Horrible. I hate you who did that. Canceled.
You mean Jerry Jones?
Yeah, he's canceled.
I'm pretty sure the entire city of Dallas wishes that would happen.
But this is America's podcast.
Yes.
Okay, now it's getting branded as that.
Yeah.
This is getting branded America's podcast. We're doing it. We're trademarking it.
The
Love
four bearded white dudes in Pennsylvania just talking of fucking history.
One of them in a Roman helmet.
Maybe that's what we should have called the show, The Great
founders
American
love
Podcast. Oh, boy.
If it's not America's podcast, it's at least Rome's podcast.
We went from Atlantis to the Cowboys,
True.
both of which are probably not going to exist.
Yeah, they're both on their way out. The one that I have the most fun with when it comes to conspiracy theorists, though, isn't Atlantis. I'm also not even talking about Tartaria right now.
I was hoping you were going back to
If
it.
we're going to talk about Tartaria, it's got to be in the Patreon segment because I will not be able to be polite enough for YouTube.
Well, that's where we started anyway, so we'll just make all of
That's what I'm
Patreon the
thinking
Tartaria
is,
segment.
We'll get back into that. But so if you want to see the Tartaria segment, subscribe to the Patreon because I'm going to get mean. I'm going to get really mean about it. Like, I'm as mean as I can possibly be.
You don't understand. I have to hold him back almost every time we record something from like
Being mean.
yes, and that's the gentlest way to put it.
When it's like Flat Earth or Tartaria.
Yeah,
I'm not mean, or the RCMP. Or the Ridley Township Police.
Again, I could just keep going. But
Or David Politis.
Yeah,
I'm
exactly.
pretty nice to him, all things considered.
You are considering the current situation. I think if we get through all of the books,
I might not be nice to him by the time we get through all of the books. My point, what I want to talk about with conspiracy theorists, is Derinkuyu. Have you heard of Derinkuyu?
That sounds familiar, but no.
Have you?
Not on top of my head now.
We've done a video on it, so you've at least heard of it.
we've done a video on it. I thought you guys were going to do that for the Lost Civilizations thing because I remember
It was going to be on the list, but Derinkuyu is this. Describing it as an underground city doesn't quite feel right, but that really is what it is. It's a tunnel complex.
In Turkey?
Yeah, in Turkey. That
Wait,
guy.
I do remember this.
Yeah,
yes,
that
I
guy-
just remember his name.
Yeah, that he discovered it because like one of his chickens went through a hole in his wall or something.
It's discoveries,
Turkey,
you know.
So they dig it out and they're like, oh wow, there's a whole like system of tunnels here that go down far.
And Plato didn't know about that.
No, he did not.
he couldn't fit through the opening. That's the problem.
Why he was.
But
That's right.
so for a long time, what's been puzzling is, what was this built for? Because the latest editions are during the Byzantine period.
Oh,
Like,
interesting.
also, it's possible that during the genocide that the Turks committed in the early 1900s,
What
Yeah.
could you possibly be referring to? I do not know.
but during that period, it's believed that people actually may have like hid in these tunnel systems as recently as the 1920s. Like Greeks, for example, when the Turks were also being not so great to Greeks. But that's not why they were built.
Are you telling me Greeks are digging secret tunnels?
Yes. There are. Listen, man, the Greeks are digging tunnels beneath Turkish cities.
Secret tunnel.
Where was I? Yeah, so Derinkuyu. It is the most recent editions are in the Byzantine period, but they've been adding on to it for a lot longer than that. At the very least, as early as 800 BC, potentially as early as 12 or 1500 BC.
That's a huge gap that it potentially could be, especially considering the amount of things that are happening in terms of civilization at that point. That's not saying, the difference between 4000 BC and 3000 BC. Like that's not really as much of a difference.
We know they were utilized. We know the Phrygians utilized them because we found Phrygian pottery.
As refrigerators. I mean, that's
Okay,
fine.
yeah,
That's
sure,
their name.
that too. But we know the Phrygians used them because we found
our
Phrygian
role.
pottery.
Yeah.
But the question
They were
is,
the original Phrygians, and then other ones moved in, and those were the refrigians.
And then GE stepped in there, of course, and they electrified the whole thing.
oh good God! So the Phrygians,
That sounds painful.
The Phrygians move in sometime around 900 or 800 BC. But the question is, did the Hittites build it? Because
My question at that point is, why would they build it? The Hittites were an exceptionally aggressive people that would be on the move to attack. They wouldn't be building a series of defensive tunnels.
but really, neither would the Phrygians.
No.
So it's like
They wanted it to not be so hot out.
yeah, so everybody's like, what was going on here? One possibility is that it had something to do with the sea peoples, but it's so far inland that doesn't make sense.
I mean, cold storage is a thing, especially for that time for caves.
Yeah.
It would make sense from an agricultural society to build a series of tunnels and caves that things would specifically be stored in. Hell, you go down into Peru, right? And up within the Inca had this really cool thing that they utilized the mountains naturally for this, where they would build entire food storage complexes on top of mountains. Because you had like the idea of you can build it underground, or you could just put it so high up in the sky where it's cold and dry that the food won't go bad. And they would do this with products.
Yeah, so the question there is, why was it easier to store stuff underground?
Well, there's two things. One is more, you get below a certain level of topsoil.
Their layers
And the
weren't that deep.
No, but even still, the temperature stabilizes.
Yeah.
And so, A, that's a primary reason for it. Also, B, you're going to have to give me a little bit of context about what was going on in the region at this time, because the first thing that comes to my mind is safe travel. If you're traveling underground, you don't have to worry about running into people or predators
But they
above
don't
you.
stretch between cities.
What is just intercity?
It's just under a city.
I mean, maybe it's like a primitive form of subway.
Yeah.
I don't mean with cars and stuff. I mean just walking.
So that's
I know, but just
of
the way that it was said. I get what you mean. Sub just means under and then way, like a way to go. Like, I get that. Like,
Technically, it has to be correct. Yeah.
part of the problem with it is that they almost certainly had changes between the Hittite or Phrygian use and the next group of people to use it. Like, they probably dug things out. There probably aren't artifacts remaining in the exact position they originally were. So whatever it looked like when it was first built, we have no idea.
Hear me out. The sea peoples had nuclear weapons.
And they accidentally dropped some over Spain.
Yep, and then exactly, yeah. And then they were like, we better
It was
dig
Vault-Tec.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
Phrygians found out about it. They were like, we got to get all the food out of our refrigerators. We're gonna
so
put
they
it down
enlisted
there.
then the help of the Native Americans and the Atlanteans.
Yes.
To come
Yes.
and start digging.
So
Yes.
one
Atlantis
interesting thing, and I'm not saying these are necessarily connected, but one thing that I find interesting, if you look at Zoroastrianism, most cultures have a flood story.
Yeah.
The Zoroastrians have an ice story, where the world was too prosperous, everything was going a little too well, so the divine being encased a third of the world in ice, both to the north and south. Now that sounds like
That
glaciers.
sounds like glaciers in
Yes.
the poles.
This also makes me concerned that human history goes back a lot longer, or civilization history goes back a lot longer, because if they have a freezing myth, then that probably means that civilization also existed prior to the last ice age.
Or at the very least, that these people kept up an oral tradition going back 10,000 years.
Yeah.
Or
Well,
the
no,
Persians.
longer than that, right?
Yeah. Well, no, not quite as long as that, because we're talking about 600 BC, so 9,000 years.
When was the warmest time prior to the last ice age?
Oh God, I don't know.
Because that's my
Now I
thought.
gotta look this up.
Yeah.
God damn it, this is
The warmest dinosaurs.
But yeah, it was. My
Dinosaurs
thinking,
dug that tunnel.
yeah, my thinking with
It's
that
the
story,
Raptor Speedway.
Yeah, my thing with that story is it probably was passed down by from like before that ice age, which is wild. But we also get this with Native Americans.
So you're saying
We get the Native Americans talking about the ice melting and things flooding.
the Native Americans were the real Hyperboreans.
Oh, good God!
Columbus didn't find America.
America found him.
No, the natives found them, and they were like, no. No, we're going back to the mounds. But then by the time they got back, they were all irradiated from...
Oh my God!
Dude.
But let me
mounds-
finish. Let me finish the thought really quick here, 'cause
mounds
this is important.
connect
This is
to
just
the tunnels.
connected.
In the Zoroastrian mythology,
Yeah.
the way that they survived this glacial period was by going underground. And now this area is where the Indo-Europeans would have passed through on their way to Persia.
Wouldn't the glaciers have just covered the
All right, I will
the
say
caves?
this. The last
Tunnels.
Again, it's
So the last glacial
Okay.
maximum,
Okay.
the point at which the glaciers peaked, the most ice existed, was between 26,000 and 19,000
Yep.
BC. That was the peak of maximum ice coverage. And then from there, that is where at that point, heading all the way down to typically 11,700 or 11,500 is considered the end of the ice age.
Do you have a map of where that maximum was on the globe? Notice I said globe.
I mean, you can basically look at Canada. What they show is like the shelf. I still remember there's a thing out here where you can see like the glacial shelf and what it did to the topsoil as it just pushed everything out and what was left behind as it retreated.
well, like the Humboldt Sink, for example, in Nevada, was a lake during this time period.
Yeah.
Like that's
Specifically in Europe
that's
and Asia.
how far south the glaciers got in North America.
Specifically in Europe and Asia, though.
Well, I think that, let's see, Doggerland was above the water, but was it above the glaciers? It wasn't.
That's like between Britain
Yeah.
and
Okay,
let me take
so
a look.
on North America, just pulling this up here for what it... Oh, God, that's just showing it.
you guys are making a great case for global warming.
Okay, so from what I'm seeing in here right
Sounds like a great
now,
thing,
from
actually.
going all the way through, I mean, the glaciers reached all the way really into just the northern tip bit of Kentucky.
And in Europe, during the Younger Dryas, it was basically everything. It was basically everything north of central England.
Yeah, it looks like York. Basically,
Yeah.
from York up is just ice.
Yeah. So all of the Scandinavian territories, most of modern Germany. Well, not most, but a good portion of modern
The
Germany.
northern tip. It's around like the Pomerania region. The Pomerania region in here. Yeah, you can see it there off on the side, specifically when looking at the relations of the countries. So that Pomerania region that goes right into the Baltic Sea. So obviously all of Scandinavia is naturally under ice. And then from Pomerania, heading a bit over into Poland and along the Baltic.
Interesting little split there between Iberia and France.
What do you mean?
Right along the line, at least on his map.
Wait, let me see that one.
That's because that's the Pyrenees.
Yeah.
That's the mountains.
But it's just crazy that it's almost the entirety of that line.
Yeah, would have just been a big chunk of ice because obviously colder temperature and everything, you would have had just the mountains being ice.
And this is what I keep coming back to when it comes to things like, Atlantis and what Graham Hancock talks about is we have all this weird stuff that points back to this date. Why is it there? Like, what was going on? Why are humans building things here at this point in time and then just not at all for 6,000 years? That's the stuff that I find interesting.
And then the response is generally, I don't know. And
Exactly.
then what then happens after that is then people go and make up the theory specifically for what they think it is.
Yeah.
Which is where you get a lot of the ancient apocalypse, ancient aliens, all the different kinds of things to explain things.
My favorite is that that Derinkuyu was built before like the flood.
Like, we're talking biblical? Like pre-flood?
Yeah. Because the way that you survive a flood is to go into tunnels.
Yeah.
I don't know. My default is the same thing that happened in Ireland.
Famine?
It was
No.
the British.
No.
The British?
No.
The Vikings?
No.
Caused the Bronze Age collapse.
The Gales?
No.
The
French?
No.
Finton?
Wait,
No.
what happened in Ireland? Like, what's the thing we're trying to explain the cause of?
What happened
Finton.
when they discovered something that was really good,
They put it
Whiskey.
in a museum.
and then they didn't do anything else for hundreds of years?
Yeah.
So anytime where there's a civilization that discover or something happens, and then nothing.
They discover like
There
this
is, like, a
deep
period of
growing
that.
mushroom cave and then just completely collapses. I just bit my lip.
It does seem that anytime like a new civilization gets introduced to alcohol, there's like 200 or 300 lost years
Yep.
of just like, everybody's kind of drunk
Well,
now.
do we know when alcohol was first, like truly first
Oh,
formulated?
there was ale thousands and thousands of
But
years
you know what
ago.
early beer was like? Like, this is one of those things for ancient civilizations in here and how all this shit would occur accidentally.
Yeah.
So it does tie into agriculture, but not just agriculture, because alcohol existed before agriculture. Because what happened is that there's a natural fermentation process that happens because of the sugars that creates alcohol. So people would harvest grain and types of things like emmer and other stuff before it was ever domesticated. Like, you would just find the wild patches where stuff would grow and you could harvest it and use it to make a kind of porridge, basically. Well, what would happen, at least the running theory goes, and they've seen provable examples of this, is that if you left the early wheat porridge and stuff out, with enough time, in its soupy, gloppy form, it would become alcoholic. And this would be an early form of, and basically imagine alcoholic oatmeal.
Yeah, we basically had alcoholic yogurt before anything else.
Yeah. And so what would happen is that they would utilize this for beer. So if you actually look at the early forms of beer, have you ever seen Egyptian hieroglyphs that show them drinking beer? It's not using cups, it's not using steins. They have big clay pots with straws. And you may wonder, why the fuck are they using straws to drink beer? That's because at the top layer of all of their beer is, I can't remember the term for what it was, but it's just like, imagine suds, bits of things, and dirt, and all different kinds of things that are at the top, those are the grain bits and left over. So it's like, imagine trying
They
to
didn't
push.
consider just pouring it through a cloth.
Yeah. So when you drank it, you had to use the reed straws, and you stuck it through to the bottom so you could drink from the bottom, because all the nasty bits would float to the top.
So that actually makes me think of something in particular.
The microorganism I had growing in that jar in my apartment.
Believe it or not, no. But thanks for reminding me of that. When this is a question to then ask another question.
All right.
When
Also, we're probably gonna have to go to Patreon after
soon,
that.
we have another 5 minutes. When was the first instance of writing?
Oh, that depends on what you
right?
classify as writing. Because I guess that like the earliest form that
December
we know
11th, 1742.
That's the
The earliest form that we at least know for like proper writing is cuneiform. Yes,
And that
specifically
was-
out of Sumeria.
There is that
What time frame?
So cuneiform was 2000 BC, wasn't it?
at least. Yeah, I think about then.
So here's my thing: is that
I think slightly before that.
within
I think it was 2600 is
Yeah.
what it was. Hold on. Cuneiform. See, this is the whole point. It's like when we talk about any of this stuff in here, we're just saying something and trying to string all this together. We do want to verify things, not just say random shit.
yep.
I just want to say random shit, actually.
Yeah, that's
good.
our
That's
role.
good. That's good for you guys, though.
Yeah. We balance them out.
Yeah.
Oh shit, no, I was wrong. The earliest form, not 2500, 3500 BC.
There you go.
Yeah.
So my main question is: in any
I
civilization,
think I was thinking about the first literature.
Yep, maybe.
in any civilization, you're going to have some level of specialization, and the more complex the civilization, the more striated the specializations become. Is it possible that in these civilizations that existed prior to known forms of written language, that upon the whether internal or external breakdown of these civilizations, the reason why we didn't see recovery was because a lot of that knowledge was lost in a way that could not be regained without essentially trial and error?
Oh, yeah. If you have a large segment of your population die off, or you have to go on a massive migration or something like that pre-writing, there's a good chance you're going to lose stuff.
You're going to lose massive amounts. It's one of the reasons why, even when talking about things with the Library of Alexandria, I've talked about this before. There's a bunch of those theories you see online where people say, oh, if we hadn't lost the Library of Alexandria or other stuff, our civilization would be so much more advanced than it is now. No, it would not. Absolutely would not.
We might be about 100 years ahead.
No, even then, the majority of what they kept or had track of for anything was specifically records for culture. What we lost was not information that would help the future from then. What we lost is information that would tell us about the past.
Well, there are theories that like certain things that were akin to Da Vinci's drawings might have been kept there. For things like, what is it? There was potentially a camera that was made, or at least designed during the Hellenistic era.
That doesn't surprise me, considering how simple early cameras were.
So, like, and it really was just like what early cameras were, where you had a mirror and a piece of, I forget exactly what kind of textile they used, but basically it would burn the image onto the textile.
That would have actually set history back a few hundred years, though, because then the Greeks would have made podcasts.
The Greeks wouldn't have made podcasts because they would have devolved into just like,
If the Greeks made podcasts,
the Greeks would have made OnlyFans.
it would have been
That's what I was waiting for someone to
They
say.
would have been the ultimate bro podcasts.
Yeah.
But it would have been the ones that, like, you've seen the ones that are stereotypical of, like, basically just bashing on women. It would have been so far chauvinistic that it would be gay. It would literally be, we are such bros.
So you mean like the Tates?
No, it would be the Tates, but even more like with homosexual tendencies.
So the Tates.
With even more.
Oh my God, I'm not sure you can get more.
Not gonna lie, I would love to have actually seen a primary source
hello, ladies.
of...
Hi.
Howdy.
I think it's just me. We need these opened.
Yeah, I would love to see a primary source of Plato just
gotta be
flexing on people.
I was gonna say, you gotta be really careful considering we were just talking about a Greek podcast so chauvinistic that it's gayer than the Tates.
Specifically would love to see a primary source of Plato saying, great argument, but...
You know what? I think that there is an argument to be made that Plato would absolutely have topped Andrew Tate.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, he would have power bottomed.
No, because that was the thing, was that the position of authority was the top.
Yes, but then at that point, you're going to get into discussion of the people that... do you have to then have a debate to determine who is going to be?
Well, I feel like Plato would just wrestle.
Yeah, he probably would.
Yeah.
Like,
Ladies and gentlemen, we're
Socrates.
officially on Patreon.
No, we're not yet, but we should be. So this would be a good time to switch. So
Yeah, I mean, it's about that time.
Yeah, we'll continue talking about Greek OnlyFans and
Flat earthers
Tartaria.
and people that may be responsible
Yeah.
for
Oh
flat
yeah,
Earth.
guys, if you want to hear more about Tartaria and the entire Flat Earth saga, welcome to Patreon. Come on over.
Come
We
on
really
over.
would like you to join.
But if you're not on the Patreon, you're just hanging out here, then it was nice of you to hang out with us. We appreciate your time. And don't don't get caught with your pants down in Greece.
We'll see you in the shit show.